Hello, welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. The Supreme Court has sided with the city of Grants Pass in a ruling which answers the question, is it cruel and unusual punishment if cities ticket, even jail people for sleeping outdoors in public places? Their answer in a 6-3 ruling was, yes, it's all right to ticket or even jail them. Well, what does this mean in real? What does that mean for those who are homeless living outdoors in Salem? To answer that question, I've asked as my guest today Gretchen Bennett from the City of Salem. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome, Wendy. It's good to be here.
Well, this is the Supreme Court's biggest decision in decades on homelessness, and it's having a big impact across the United States. And what impact, if any, is it going to have here?
Thank you. That's a great question that I think will be unfolding a bit over time. Here in Oregon, back a couple of years ago, our Oregon legislature codified some of the legal principles that the Grants Pass case and a former case in Boise related to. So although we do have this clarity from the United States Supreme Court that clarifies what states and cities and counties can do, another responsibility of us here in Salem will be to follow Oregon's law. And so there's no immediate change today as a result of the Supreme Court decision, because we'll still be following the law here in Oregon.
Take us to that law, because it was modified, wasn't it, recently, this state law, because they anticipated something coming from the Supreme Court in the Grants Pass case, that they wanted to make sure that Oregon law would pass muster.
You're right, Wendy. At the time, I believe Speaker of the House, but now Governor Tina Kotek, and people in the Oregon legislature amended the Oregon revised statutes to clarify that any Oregon city, when they're considering rules and regulations related to unsheltered, sheltering out of doors in public spaces, that any of our regulations would need to be objectively reasonable to, especially to persons experiencing homelessness. We're able to put into place time, manner, and place restrictions, but those restrictions need to be objectively reasonable, workable, doable. And so there's a lot of discussion about, well, what does that mean exactly? And different communities have tried to figure out, well, what could be considered objectively reasonable?
And one of the things that bothered cities, and they complained bitterly about, was that it makes it almost impossible for us to really be sure that when we're enforcing public safety laws, it's not going to result in a civil lawsuit or something like that. They really needed some direction. One of the things the Supreme Court decision did do was give that job back to the cities to decide.
Yeah, and then in Oregon, which is kind of interesting since an Oregon city is what led to the Supreme Court's decision. In Oregon, cities will all still, of course, have to follow the state law. So you won't see individual cities, at least I wouldn't predict, passing things that would be different from the Oregon revised statute, because of course one of our fundamental principles is following the rule of law and following state law. So we're still bound by state law here in Oregon.
All right, so define for me, for example, what is meant by that decision-making process. Can you give me an example of what happens?
Sure, and if I think to clarify your question, like what goes into thinking through what can be objectively reasonable?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, that is something that I think people are wrestling with, because it's, you could maybe argue that it's a bit subjective, to decide what might be reasonable to one might not be reasonable to another. What might be reasonable to a fairly able-bodied person may be less reasonable to a person with a mobility disability. So you have to kind of think about that. What might be reasonable for a person who's unsheltered might not be reasonable for a property owner of an adjacent property where the person's sheltering. So it's definitely relative and contextual in my mind. But the City of Salem embarked upon some conversations a bit back with community members, with people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, with our elected officials, and we came to clarify and amend Salem's code to try to clarify our own guidance in this area, and that went into place just over a year ago here in Salem. And it does lay out some place and manner restrictions here in Salem. Like, just for example, we clarify that there wouldn't be it wouldn't be permitted to have unsheltered camping in our residential zones, or within 600 feet of a shelter who's providing services to people experiencing homelessness, or to block a sidewalk. One of the manner restrictions about sheltering is that there should always be a path of travel that's appropriate and wide enough for people experiencing disabilities. That full 3 feet of passage of travel is important for our sidewalks. So we put into place manner and place restrictions here in the City of Salem that help guide what's lawful and not lawful, which we intend to be compliant with the state's law.
Do citizens complain to you at all?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Community members have so much to say, understandably so, because these are very real and difficult and expensive impacts. I mean, if you think about it, a sidewalk, a park, a street, those were not meant for human habitation. And so if they are being used, that comes with so many challenges and problems. And so people call and email and testify routinely. And that's important because people need to be able to speak to what they're experiencing. It's really important for all of us to be aware of that information and to have that guide anything that we can do around that. If people do want to submit a complaint or a concern or even just have a conversation, we do have an online portal where people can write in and they can explain the location that's concerning to them. They can provide details for us on what they're seeing and what the challenges are. And we love that because it gives us that real-time direct detail, and then we can look at it and go from there.
Is there a place locally where this is a real problem?
Oh, several.
Give us an example so that we can see how it played out and how you're resolving it.
Oh, sure. Well, Wendy, my mind goes to an area in Northeast Salem that our team has been working at this week, for example. And we're talking in July. And so back in July, if anyone's watching in advance, but we're talking in July of 2024. And this week, in the vicinity of Hawthorne Northeast, just north or so of Sunnyview Road, for example, we had a number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness right along the sidewalk and along the roadway. That particular location is a bit complex because the Oregon Department of Transportation has some ownership and responsibility in these areas. There's also some nearby adjacent private properties. So there's a few partners to collaborate with and to coordinate with to make sure. But we begin, so, community will write in and be concerned. They'll call in and they'll express concern for what they're seeing. And then we'll do an initial assessment to try to understand what the circumstances are and what the context is. And at the top of our mind in our assessment is health and safety. You know, are there conditions that we think are just simply unhealthy? Is there some sort of risk of a communicable disease? Is there something that's beginning that's just not, that's going to spread some kind of bacteria that we're going to worry about? Is there a concern for safety? Are people sheltering adjacent to or too near a roadway or a train track, for example? Is there a criminal aspect to the location that has us concerned? So we have to think about health and safety as our top priorities when we're looking at locations. Another very beginning step, we're assessing the health and safety because sometimes things are very imminent. Like, I remember one person was in the middle of a road and it's like, okay, no, not a choice. Must go now. Like, we can't let you just be in the middle of the road. So that's an immediate, you're moving out of the road, because that's just unsafe for everybody. And
sure.
I think everyone would agree with that. But barring that instant, immediate response, there's a beginning for us, which begins with trying to understand the person and what their resources, needs are, what their goal is, and how we can help encourage that step into what's next. If that's a shelter bed, if that's a treatment bed, if that's some sort of housing opportunity, we want to immediately begin with information and resources, and we're asking questions. We're talking with the people to try to understand who, if anyone, they're connecting with already. And then we're on the phone with those folks, you know, okay, like let's say somebody has a pathway towards a housing opportunity. Maybe we're concerned about the safety of the location they're at. We're in touch with that housing opportunity to try to figure out the timeline, to try to encourage them to stay in touch and not lose connection. If we're going to have them not stay at that location, we don't want to break any connections with service providers. So also, if people aren't connected, we're tapping all of our partners. You know, within the city team, we have a close relationship with Salem Housing Authority's Special Projects Outreach team that will connect with people. We have within our Salem Police Department our Homeless Services team, which are two offers with special training, and they've developed a lot of relationships with people experiencing homelessness, and they're in touch. You know, they're listening for who that person's working with, what that person's need or goal is, and then making sure we're moving those goals forward instead of breaking that apart. You know, I remember at this particular area, for example, there was a young woman who was really ready and seeking some assistance just to not be on the streets, and our homeless services team was able to get a connection with our navigation center and be able to welcome that person into shelter. So that's our objective, is get folks remaining connected with services or connect them with services and find shelter or housing. We can't always succeed with that, for sure, but that's where we are. That's our beginning. Then we're having those conversations, we're assessing health and safety, we're looking at our own capacity for when we can be where, and at some point we make a decision about if that's a viable place for people to be, and if it's not, then we're going to post required time notices for folks. If someone's in an established location where they've set up a place to be, they're by law, by Oregon law, entitled to a 72-hour notice before we just say it's over, and with, again, safety exceptions. Middle of the road, there's no 72 hours, you know. But
railroad,
yeah. No, we worked recently with some folks that were right adjacent to the railroad tracks, and we were so worried for their safety. And so we're like, nope, this is not a safe choice. We need you to not be right here. All the while, our Salem Police Department is working with the railroads, you know, on the broader systems around that, because we just don't think that's safe. Yeah.
One of the city nightmare situations is if people say, no, we're not moving. We're not.
I know.
And or you don't have any shelter for us.
Right. I know.
What's our situation?
Yeah, that's a really hard...
Do we have enough shelter for people?
It's an excellent question, which is at the heart of some of the hardest conversations. The short answer is no, we don't have enough shelter for the types of situations that emerge for us. And I'll give you an example. We have people who have different types of varying abilities, and some need assistance with toileting or need assistance if they were to fall down to be able to get back up again, or maybe they have a severe and persistent mental illness and would really need staff with special training to provide support. And we struggle to find locations for folks with specific types of needs. And so there's that whole kind of category. We don't have enough for unaccompanied minors, enough for people with special needs. Another whole situation is just finding what I'll kind of nickname sometimes the secret sauce, or that point of connection to help a person take a chance to come inside or give up a familiarity to come inside.
That's a challenge, isn't it, for many people? I don't think that that's particularly understood, the terror of being away from the outdoors.
Well, you're absolutely right, because in some situations, people have developed relationships and safety protocols, if you will, where people look out for each other. People may have experienced past trauma being inside or being at a program, or they might have made progress towards a goal and then it fell apart, and so there's like a lack of trust in systems or agencies. There's lots of things. I talked with a veteran once who was along one of our major thoroughfares who just flat out said, I'm not going inside anywhere ever again. Just very, very much an outside kind of person. We have, though, one thing, it's just even in the 4 years that I've been focusing on this issue, we do have more shelter options. I've been so grateful. The city and our community partners, we went from approximately 200-ish beds, 250 beds, to up over 600 shelter beds here in Salem. And many of those new beds allow a person to bring a pet, or allow a person to not only be male, but to have either a non-binary or be female. We have more beds for women now than we used to have before. I'm so grateful for those opportunities to bring more people in than we had before. And that's huge and can't be understated, because that's just something I'm grateful for every day. But no, we don't have enough of every type of situation at every time, or we don't always have, we haven't learned how to connect with all of the people in a way that will help them feel comfortable to come inside either.
There are day centers for people to go to either get out of the heat or cold. Is that a direction that is useful? Especially, there's one where it even has hours or a single day of the week, Monday, for non-binary people.
Oh, sure, that is super helpful. I think we need more in the day center area. I'm not aware of, I'm concerned there's not specific revenue options for day center services, but those day center services can be so helpful. Not all of our overnight shelters have daytime resources, so people have nowhere to be during the day. But if you think about it, during the day is opportunity time to make progress towards objectives that you might have. You might need a working computer, you might need a cell phone that's charged, you might need to be able to meet with case managers. And so even things like taking a shower or getting a meal, the day centers do so much in that space. And I think we could use more resources in that area here in Salem for sure.
You give a picture of people who may not even stop to think about it. Wait a minute, there's actually a place where they could take a shower, or a mobile unit where they have showers, and these are all things people who are sheltered take for granted, and people who've made it into transitional housing can look forward to on a stable basis. How do you get this stair step to what's the secret sauce you're talking about that really works?
I hear you, I know. Well, we've been excited about the continuum of care that's been developing in our Marion and Polk counties.
Continuum of care.
Yeah, when you said stair step, it made me think of the way we look at it as a continuum of care, because we were in partnership, the Marion and Polk counties and the City of Salem and the City of Kaiser and a number of other neighboring cities and very critical community partners, the school district, the health department, Salem Health, the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency, for example. All of these partners came together to form our Homeless Alliance, which is essentially our continuum of care. And that's exactly what we're trying to set up, so that there's an opportunity if you're experiencing unsheltered homelessness to be able to have an assessment done where you can talk with someone, answer questions about your situation, and then essentially there's a set of data and a vulnerability score, if you will. And then we can work as a team to understand the person's need and find a match that would best address their situation, rather than a first come first serve or everybody go get on everybody list, to kind of have a coordinated opportunity. And then our Salem Housing Authority, for example, has opened several supportive housing units in Salem recently, Redwood Crossing, Yaquina Hall, and Sequoia Crossing. And they look for if someone has been able to stabilize in an emergency shelter, come to grow accustomed to living with and around other people, to the behavioral guest expectations that come along with that. It gives kind of a stair step, like you said. So if you're coming into that and then you growing comfortable with that system, and then coming into, for example, one of the supportive housing units at Salem Housing Authority, that's maybe an example of that stair step that you're describing. There's not enough across the board. We would love more supportive housing units and generally just more affordable housing units to meet people's needs and demand. But that's kind of the thought, is help folks get into the resource that's right for them.
Would getting just more units for our community of affordable housing go a long way toward resolving the homelessness problem?
It would. It wouldn't be the sole answer, but it would be a big part of the answer. There's no doubt that we just, for example, increasingly seniors who are retiring onto the lowest Social Security allotment, that's an example of a group of people for whom it's so hard to find affordable housing within that budget. So there is no doubt. I talk with people who work at lower wage jobs who are just really struggling to either stay in their apartment as rents increase or to identify a place that they can afford on their salaries. So that's huge. But it's not everything. It's also about identifying solutions for people with severe and persistent mental illness, for people who actually would need assisted living. Maybe they're up in years and they need an assisted living bed that is available and at their level of income or ability to pay for that, for example. So there's a lot of things. Alcohol and drug treatment is another part of the picture, and an important part of the picture. Having assessments and treatment solutions right at the ready every time is another part of the picture. But affordable housing is huge and definitely a big part of the answer too.
What is Salem's big picture for sustainable livability? What do they want for the city?
Oh gosh. Well, the City of Salem's mayor and city council have a strategic plan with a set of policy agenda items. For example, within this space, they're looking to expand alternative shelter options. They're looking to expand supportive housing and affordable housing as a part of our strategic plan. We look to our partners, at the county and the state level around health-based services. We don't have that expertise at the city, but we root on and collaborate with our partners who can develop things in that area. But the City of Salem has goals around being welcoming, being livable, being safe, and those are really the values that we try to balance every day when we're working on Hawthorne, for example.
And people who are homeless and newly homeless and otherwise, that number is on the rise. Do you know what the number of homeless is, the homeless count?
Well, I can tell you what we have been able to count and collect, but I would begin and end my answer by saying that I don't ever feel I completely know the accurate answer, because I never know in any given month who is becoming unsheltered and who is succeeding and no longer being homeless anymore, right? And so that is a very dynamic number. But we have a couple of tools that we use to try to track and understand the issue. One of them is something called the Homeless Management Information System, which is that survey or the assessment I was mentioning, where we're able to sit with a person and do an assessment. And about 4,400 people in Marion and Polk counties completed those assessments in 2023. That doesn't mean every person was unsheltered. It may mean they were housing insecure, maybe at risk, they're about to lose their apartment, for example, but that's how many people completed that last year. And then the last time the City of Salem had an unsheltered point-in-time count, that gave us a number of just shy of 1,400 people experiencing homelessness. But I called it an unsheltered count, and I have to clarify, of that, I think it was about 698 people in Salem specifically, not Marion, Polk counties, reported being unsheltered. And then about another 600 reported being in our shelter bed programs. Those numbers, though, are generally understood to be undercounts and to not fully capture the real situation. So, short answer, I don't know.
Well,
but that's what we do know.
But thank you for that. You just mentioned a group of people, seniors on fixed income from their Social Security, who could also find themselves, living in their camper someplace because they can't afford a home here, even an apartment.
That's
what
right.
is the city doing about that, really?
Yeah, that's a need that I think probably touches anyone who glimpses into that. That's not what we want for anybody. And so examples of things that the city is working on in that area, part one thing is the expansion of alternative shelter, the expansion of affordable housing. All of those have these populations in mind. One favorite project that I enjoyed was seeing the city be able to have a partnership with the United Way of the Mid-Willamette Valley.
Oh.
The city, Mayor Hoy identified some land that we were able to provide to a strategy that United Way has launched called Cottages United, which built cottages with this population in mind, set costs with this population in mind, and they've just opened, and then this in the past couple months, and then our Center 50 Plus comes and provides the WOW services, the wellness on wheels services to try to help develop a community within it. It's called Cottages United, and that's an example. I know we could fill more of those if we could find a way to accelerate that strategy, find more land, build more cottages. I have every confidence that we have plenty of people who need that kind of thing. So maybe just to offer an example.
In closing, I want to go back to the secret sauce you're talking about, that which makes things happen. What comes to mind when you think of the secret sauce?
Oh, the people that I work with, coupled with the very practical resource decisions.
Resources.
If you've got a person able to connect with another person. If like I think of some of my colleagues who connect so well with people experiencing homelessness, and they have a conversation where some trust and a relationship can be developed. And then if we've got a next, if we have a way to replace identification if that's been stolen, to connect to a work opportunity, to connect to a drug treatment program, to connect to a shelter bed that's actually going to meet that person's real needs, that's the secret sauce. But I think it varies by person. Our community of people experiencing homelessness is so diverse, children to seniors, with every personality and challenge imaginable. And so I think it's a very individualized experience. So I'm always looking I wonder what the match is, right? What's the secret sauce for this person? How do we help this particular community or this particular individual take that next step? That's the secret. I always look for, okay, who's the secret sauce for them? It'll vary.
Well, you don't think that there's really any reason to fear being punished for being outdoors, the example being having to pay a fine. That should come up very seldom. Would it ever come up?
Right. If it is going to come up, that's not our approach here in Salem. Given the state laws and the approach here, we're after that voluntary cooperation is what we're trying to have. If someone is, let's take an extreme example. You're in the middle of the road. It's not okay to be there. You're completely declining our attempts at having you not be there anymore. That could lead to an arrest. It could lead to a fine if that's where we go. But it's a very rare circumstance for us in Salem, and it's not our objective. Our objective is voluntarily helping have the health and safety that we're all looking for, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And I can't predict the future in Oregon. I don't know what or if the laws will change in coming years, but for right now, that's correct.
Gretchen Bennett, it's always good to talk to you.
You as well, Wendy.
Thank you for clearing up a situation that I'm sure is giving people fits and many, many questions.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today on InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw.